Before diving into this incredible story, consider subscribing to the channel and hitting the bell. Every story here has something to say, and you won't want to miss a single one. CEO's father disguises himself as a bricklayer to test his employees, and fires them on the spot. In the vast metropolis of Chicago, where skyscrapers pierce the sky and each construction site further shapes the urban landscape, Leroy Industries occupied a prominent position. This family business, founded in the 1960s by George Leroy, had managed to navigate the decades with rigor and tenacity. George, a man with a stern appearance but a straight heart, had built this company from nothing. His sense of a job well done, his unwavering integrity and his high standards towards his employees had forged the company's reputation. At 70, George had retired from active life. He lived on a small farm an hour's drive from Chicago, surrounded by fields and a rural calm that contrasted with the hustle and bustle of the city. Yet, despite this peaceful retirement, he never lost sight of the business he had created. Every week, he received reports and balance sheets, and closely monitored the decisions made by his son, David Leroy, who, at 45, now headed Leroy Industries. David was a charismatic man, both a shrewd strategist and a visionary. Under his leadership, the company had experienced rapid expansion, modernizing its methods and diversifying its projects. Many praised his dynamism, his keen business acumen, and his ability to manage teams. But for George, this evolution came at too high a price, the loss of core values. On cool evenings, when the dim light of his house warmed the atmosphere, George constantly told his friends and his wife how much respect for rules, discipline, and above all, honesty seemed to have faded. Young people today no longer know what real work means, he often said, his voice tinged with disappointment. He was convinced that, without constant supervision, many employees would take advantage of the slightest managerial weakness to engage in negligent, even disrespectful, behavior. This gnawed at him from the inside, an invisible wound he carried every day. One particularly cold winter evening, as snow began to cover the roads, George held a steaming cup of coffee. He was chatting with David via video call, his face lit by the bluish screen. "Son, I've been thinking all day," George began, his tone serious. "Reading reports won't help me understand what's really going on construction sites. I have to see for myself." David frowned, worried. "Dad, this isn't a good idea. You're not as strong as you used to be. And if you go to the construction site like you, everyone will know who you are. It will be a big deal, maybe even a bad one." George shook his head in determination. "No, not like me. I'm going to disguise myself as a mason. Wear work clothes, a helmet, and go unnoticed. I want to observe without being told what to do, without having what they want to show me filtered. I want to understand reality, the real thing." David sighed, knowing that nothing could stop his father once he had an idea in mind. "Very well," he finally said. "But promise me you'll be careful." "I promise you," George replied, his eyes proud and his voice firm. The next morning, long before the sun began to break through Chicago's gray skyline, George rose with palpable determination. From his bedroom, he pulled out a pair of old blue overalls, worn by time but still sturdy, a relic of years spent on construction sites. He put them on slowly, each movement seeming to transport him back decades to when he personally surveyed sites, overseeing foundations and structures. From a small table, he took a bright yellow, slightly scuffed construction helmet that he had carefully cleaned the day before. He then gathered a trowel, a hammer, a tape measure, and a few other tools, all a little dusty, testaments to a time when craftsmanship reigned supreme. Finally, in a final, meticulous detail, he applied a fake beard he had made with cotton and dye, concealing his familiar features. Once ready, he looked in the mirror. The man he saw was no longer the respected patriarch, but just another worker, ready to plunge back into the hustle and bustle of modern construction sites. He left his quiet home and headed for the southern suburbs of Chicago. There, the immense construction site stretched over several hectares, a ceaseless ballet of machines, dust, and human effort. Upon his arrival, the din of jackhammers, engines, and busy voices gave him a strange, almost nostalgic feeling. Workers of all ages, some barely out of their teens, others well-worn, were bustling about, building what would soon become a luxury apartment complex, a symbol of urban development. George moved slowly, his step measured, observing all around him. He immediately noticed the haphazard gestures of some, the poorly stored tools, the trash left on the ground. His expert eye missed nothing. As George continued his silent inspection of the construction site, he stopped by the coffee machine, a rest area where the workers regularly gathered. There, a portly man in his 40s, wearing a paint-striped hard hat and a worn orange vest, was chatting animatedly. It was Tommy, a veteran worker, well known on the site for his influence on the younger ones. "Listen, guys," he said, lowering his voice so as not to be heard by the supervisors, "I'm telling you that to save time, you shouldn't always follow these damn safety rules to the letter. Honestly, who has time to wait for everything to be perfect? The construction site has to move forward, or we'll get our knuckles rapped." He pointed to a complex bracket installation procedure, explaining how it was possible to skip certain steps to move faster, even if it meant taking some risks. Several workers nodded, visibly tempted by this shortcut. George, hiding behind a beam, noted this scene with a mixture of concern and sadness. He knew only too well the consequences of such attitudes: an accident, a collapse, lives ruined for a fleeting gain of time. A little further on, he noticed several men taking frequent and extended cigar breaks. Some slipped away into hidden areas, sometimes disappearing for a good 20 minutes. The foreman, though present, seemed to turn a blind eye to these repeated absences. A complicit silence reigned. The scene reminded him of his father's words, who had often told him that discipline and respect for rules were the backbone of any serious enterprise. Then, at the turn of a narrow corridor between two containers filled with materials, George saw a young man, Mike, about 30 years old, with a firm face and lively eyes. Mike looked focused but agitated, glancing around. George followed discreetly, keeping a sufficient distance to avoid being noticed. He saw Mike slide a small backpack under a loosely secured board. A few minutes later, while the other workers were busy elsewhere, Mike pulled out several expensive tools, reputable brands of hammers, saws, and laser levels. These tools didn't belong to him, they belonged to Leroy Industries. Mike carefully placed them in his bag, as if he were planning to take them home with him. George felt a cold anger rise within him. This theft, however small, was a betrayal of the values he had built. It was clear that the lack of control and discipline left the door open for these behaviors. George stood there for a few moments, watching Mike, then turned away silently, determined to report these facts to his son. This visit revealed a deeper problem than he had expected. It was not just the ill will of a few, but a widespread slackness that was jeopardizing the company's reputation and security. A little later that morning, as George continued his tour of the construction site, he spotted a loose plank lying across a busy walkway. The idea immediately took root in his mind: he would simulate an incident to test the responsiveness and attitude of those in charge. He slowly approached the plank, took support on a nearby stone, then stumbled deliberately, exhaling a small cry of surprise. "Ouch!" he exclaimed, just loud enough to attract attention without sounding exaggerated. A few seconds later, a sturdy man, his face marked by fatigue and concentration, ran up, frowning. "What the hell are you doing here?" "Pay attention, damn it," the man snapped. It was Jason, the site manager, known for his abrupt temperament and impatience. George, still on the ground, tried to calm things down. "I fell because this board isn't properly secured." "It's dangerous, it should be secured quickly." Jason shrugged irritably, looking at the board without much conviction. "You're wasting your time. We have enough on our plate without me having to deal with this. Get up, get moving." Jason's firm, almost contemptuous attitude triggered a mixture of indignation and sadness in George. How could such negligence be tolerated in a place where safety should be the top priority? Without revealing his true identity, George stood up slowly, measuring each word. "You're in charge of this project, but safety must be the priority, not an afterthought. Otherwise, someone will end up seriously injured." Jason crossed his arms, visibly annoyed, but didn't respond, preferring to return to his tasks. Soon after, lunchtime arrived. George, now just another worker, sat down at a secluded wooden table, surrounded by groups of workers. He listened intently to the conversations. "The pay isn't even worth the work we do," murmured a man in his 50s. "And with the pressure we're under, it's exhausting. The foreman is pushing us to finish faster, but without more resources, it's impossible," added a younger voice. "Sometimes I prefer to take a shortcut, even if it's not safe." A female worker nodded tiredly. "We're treated like machines, not humans. It's hard to stay motivated." George then understood that the deterioration of the climate on the construction site was not only due to individual irresponsibility, but also to management that exerted constant pressure without offering real support. Later that evening, back in the quiet of his country home, George called David. "Son, it's worse than I imagined," he said in a deep voice. "The construction site is in danger. Discipline is non-existent, safety is flouted, and some are outright stealing equipment. You have to act quickly." David, though concerned, responded with determination. "Thanks, Dad. I trust you. We'll resolve this quickly, to protect the company and the people who work there." The next morning, under a gray sky still laden with drizzle, David Leroy arrived at the construction site with visible determination. He had spent a sleepless night reflecting on his father's words, aware that the situation demanded a strong and rapid response. He gathered all the employees present, a little over 50 of them, into a large temporary meeting room set up on the construction site, between the machines and the containers. The murmur gradually rose, the anxiety palpable in the air. Several workers exchanged furtive glances, aware that something important was about to happen. David stepped forward with a grave face and spoke in a clear, calm voice that immediately captured attention. "I want to begin by revealing something you don't yet know," he said, scanning the room. "Yesterday, a man among you played a very special role. This man, whom you may have mistaken for a simple mason, is none other than my father, George Leroy, the founder of this company." A stunned silence fell over the crowd. Murmurs, whispers, and incredulous glances were exchanged. Some workers turned to their neighbors, seeking confirmation. David continued. "My father came incognito to see what's really going on our construction sites, and what he discovered is alarming. The discipline, rigor, and safety that have always been the pillars of Leroy Industries are now being flouted. There's been theft, negligence, and a total lack of respect for our rules." The atmosphere became heavy, everyone feeling that this revelation was not trivial. "We will not tolerate any failure, any breach of security, any theft, and any form of negligence," David declared, clenching his fists to emphasize his words. "As a result, several of you will have to leave the company. It is a difficult decision, but necessary to ensure the longevity and honor of Leroy Industries." He signaled to an assistant who then distributed a list. David then read the names of the employees concerned, among whom were Tommy, Mike, and Jason. Tommy, for encouraging the violation of safety procedures. Mike, for proven theft of company tools. And Jason, for his lack of seriousness in supervision and his disrespectful attitude that jeopardized the entire construction site. A mixture of anger, shock, and resignation rippled through the room. Some looked away, others murmured stifled protests. But David continued, firmly. "This isn't just a punishment. We're also implementing a training and support plan for the rest of the teams. We want to give everyone back pride in a job well done, a sense of responsibility, and, above all, respect for the rules that protect us all." He ended with a voice full of hope. "Leroy Industries must be an example. Together, we will rebuild this pride and move forward in the same direction." At the end of the meeting, several workers approached David, expressing their willingness to change and their gratitude for this new opportunity. That day, a new page was written for the company, between demands and rebirth. A few months had passed since the decisive meeting where David had taken drastic measures to rectify the situation. On the construction site, the transformation was palpable at every glance. The machines, once noisy and disorderly, now seemed orchestrated by a united and motivated team. The workers arrived on time, impeccably dressed, with a seriousness that testified to a newfound pride. Waste had disappeared from the aisles, tools were neatly stored, and safety instructions were scrupulously followed. The quality of the work had never been so impeccable. Every wall erected, every beam installed, reflected attention to detail and craftsmanship. The foremen, too, had changed their attitude, more attentive, more educational, they guided their teams with balanced respect and firmness. Even the most skeptical, those who had resisted at first, had finally embraced the new direction. The atmosphere was now imbued with team spirit and shared commitment. Delays were a thing of the past, deadlines were not only met, but sometimes anticipated. At his country house, George Leroy followed this progress with growing pride. Every evening, he read through the reports and photos David sent him, witnesses to the profound change that had taken place. One summer evening, as the sun set behind the golden fields, George picked up his phone and called his son. "David," he said in a warm but emotional voice, "you have managed to combine discipline and respect. You have reconciled what I thought impossible to reconcile, rigor without authoritarianism, demanding with humanity. I am proud of you." A knowing silence fell for a few seconds. "Thank you, Dad," David replied with a smile in his voice. "I would never have made it without your guidance, your wisdom. This project is our legacy, both of us." For the first time in a long time, a real smile lit up George's face, reflecting not only the success of a project, but also the reconciliation between a father and his son, a past and a future.